The secret part of the Bible that activates the power of the mind there is, here's an unsettling truth. Most people pray for change, but think exactly the same way every day. And here's the paradox. They want a different life using the same mind that created the problems they face now. Few people realize it, but the Bible has never been just a spiritual book. It has always been a profound manual on how the mind works when it's aligned with God. What almost no one has told you is that many verses don't just talk about faith, they talk about mindset, focus, and inner discipline. And perhaps that's why some prosper, maintain peace, and move forward, while others remain trapped in cycles. Constant anxiety, fear of the future, a feeling of wasted effort, and the impression that it works for everyone else, but not for me. The problem isn't a lack of prayer, nor a lack of ability. It's a lack of mental direction. There's a part of the Bible that many people read too quickly without realizing that it contains practical instructions for governing thoughts. When the mind isn't trained, it becomes a battlefield. When it's renewed, it becomes a tool for creation. And that changes everything, from simple decisions to the course of one's entire life. Throughout this video, you will understand how the Bible teaches you to renew your mind, shield your thoughts, and align faith with action. Not with empty religious discourse, but with principles applicable to real daily life, work, finances, emotions, and choices. It's the kind of knowledge that doesn't appear in superficial content because it demands inner responsibility. And the most curious thing? When this principle is activated, the results begin to appear from the inside out. Now the question that remains is simple, but powerful. What if the problem was never the outside world, but what has been controlling your mind inside? Romans 12:2. The renewal of the mind as the beginning of everything I want to call pay attention to. Something almost no one wants to admit. Many people ask for change, but wake up with the same mindset as yesterday, like, same old, and then no miracle can withstand it, because life outside only follows what the mind decides to repeat inside, day after day. When the Bible says, do not conform, it's saying, stop accepting as normal that which diminishes you. Understand? Because conformity is comfortable, but it charges high interest, and you're the one who pays, with anxiety, scarcity, and confusion. And the turning point is simple to understand. Real transformation is not luck. It is faith, focus, and purpose, turning it into a mental routine. The person who learns this realizes that the mind is like a garden. What it waters becomes a forest, and what it ignores also becomes weeds. If it waters fear, fear grows. If it waters faith, courage grows. If it waters scarcity, life seems tight, even when there are opportunities ahead. And here's a very down-to-earth example. If she spends the whole day consuming bad news, gossip, and comparisons, she's feeding the survival mode. But if she exchanges 10 minutes of that for something that renews, a passage from the Word, a psalm, an uplifting audio, a gratitude journal, the mind begins to breathe. It's not cheap magic, it's intelligent discipline. It's training the mind, like training a muscle, one day at a time, without drama. God doesn't tell you to feel differently first. Think it's different because feelings follow suit, and that's the point. So when a person decides to renew their mind, they stop living on autopilot and start choosing what goes in, what stays, and what goes out. A simple practice is the 3-question filter. Does this bring me closer to faith? Does this strengthen my focus? Does this fuel my purpose? If the answer is no, they cut it off without guilt. Because that's what maturity is, not negotiating with what weakens you, nor giving a platform to toxic thoughts. And then comes the curiosity. If renewal changes destiny, What happens when a person discovers that they become exactly what they imagine themselves to be inside? Proverbs 23:7. You become what you imagine. There is one point that seems simple but is incredibly powerful. The Bible doesn't say you become what you want to be. It says you become what you want to be. You're welcome. And imagination here isn't childish fantasy. It's the internal movie a person plays every day, even without realizing it. If, internally, they see themselves as small, limited, always almost there, their body, decisions, and results will follow this invisible script. It's like an internal GPS. No matter how much they accelerate, if the mental address is wrong, the destination will be too. That's why identity comes before results. Always. The mind doesn't argue with what it accepts as truth. It simply executes it. When someone thinks, money is hard to come by, this isn't for me, or I never finish what I start, the brain works. Hard to prove it right. Now, when a person begins to imagine, with faith, focus, and purpose, a stronger version of themselves, something silently changes. They start speaking differently, choosing differently, acting differently, without forcing it, without theatrics, because the root has already been altered. It's the famous change from within, and the outside will follow, even if no one notices at first. A practical and simple, yet uncomfortable exercise. Before going to sleep, ask yourself, who am I training myself to be with my thoughts? If the answer is unsettling, great. It's a sign that you've woken up. From there, you can choose better mental images, seeing yourself completing tasks, acting with courage, saying no without guilt, prospering without fear. It's not self-deception, it's internal alignment, and the Bible speaks of this long before any modern book. And this opens a dangerous door for those who live on autopilot. If imagination creates identity, what happens when the mind learns to remain steady without wavering? Isaiah 26:3. A steadfast mind is a source of peace and stability. There is a principle that separates those who collapse from those who weather storms without losing their balance. A firm mind. It's not a mind that never feels fear, it's a mind that doesn't let fear rule its thoughts. A big difference. When Isaiah speaks of perfect peace, he's not talking about an easy life. He's talking about inner stability, even when everything is shaking. It's about that person who faces problems, bills, pressure, and difficult decisions, but doesn't collapse internally. Because peace doesn't come from controlling circumstances, it comes from well-chosen focus. I like using the analogy of an anchor. The sea may be rough, but if the anchor is deep, the boat won't drift. The mind works the same way. When it's anchored in faith, chaos may make noise, but it doesn't take control. The problem is that many people try to solve anxiety by changing everything externally when what needs to be trained is the core. For example, replacing 30 minutes of worry with 10 minutes of conscious breathing, a biblical text, and silence already changes the internal state. It doesn't solve everything instantly, but it returns control to the mind, and that is power. Steadfastness doesn't come from emotion, it comes from practice. Those who learn to choose what they think, learn to choose what they feel, and subsequently what they do. A steadfast mind avoids information overload, unproductive conversation, and constant comparison, because it knows that these things steal peace. It's like putting a fence around your thoughts. Nothing gets in, no voice stays. And this prepares the ground for something even deeper, because if the mind can be steadfast, it can also be trained to thrive, not just to survive. Joshua 1:8. Prosperity begins with mental discipline. There is. Here's a point that almost no one likes to hear, but everyone needs to. Prosperity is not by chance, it's mental consistency. When God speaks to Joshua, he doesn't begin by promising wealth, territory, or victory. He begins by talking about repeated thought, meditate day and night. Isn't just pretty poetry. It's strategy. It's training your focus. It's discipline applied to your mind. Because an unstable mind may receive opportunities, but it can't sustain results. And that explains why so many people start well and stop halfway through. The universe and life itself responds more to what is constant than to what is intense. Thinking big one day and small the next confuses the path. The mind becomes a divided field. Therefore, meditating is not just reading, it's revisiting, ruminating, letting the idea take root. A practical example: choose a principle each week and return to it every day, even if only for 5 minutes. It could be faith, courage, focus, or responsibility. A short time, but every day. God directly connects a disciplined mind with a prosperous path, and that's no coincidence. Prosperity doesn't begin with money. It begins with clarity. It doesn't begin with action. It begins with an inner decision. Those who train their minds learn to act with less impulse and more intention. And that changes everything. It's like aligning the steering wheel before accelerating. Less wear and tear, more direction. And this prepares a person for a greater challenge, because prospering requires overcoming something invisible first, the fear that tries to take control of the mind. 2 Timothy 1:7. Fear is not identity, it's invasion. There is a sensitive yet liberating territory. Fear doesn't define anyone, it only occupies space when the mind is unprotected. When the Bible says that God did not give us a spirit of fear, it's saying, in other words, this is not part of your essence. Fear is not personality. It's not inheritance. It's not destiny. It's a persistent thought that has gone unquestioned for too long. And most people live trying to control fear, when the real work is, I replaced it because fear and faith don't share the same space for very long. Fear is an exaggerated alarm. It makes noise, creates scenarios, and paralyzes even before anything happens. Faith, on the other hand, doesn't shout, but sustains. It acts even with trembling hands. A real example: how many times has someone stopped trying something because they thought, what if it goes wrong? Without ever testing, what if it goes right? A trained mind automatically changes that question, and that change alters decisions, conversations, and paths. It's not the absence of fear, it's mastery over it. That's the game. A sound mind is one that chooses which voice will guide its thoughts. Power to act, love to balance, and clarity to decide. This is the trio that Paul describes. In practice, this means reducing exposure to what fuels anxiety and increasing contact with what strengthens conviction. It could be prayer, reading, physical exercise, writing, or silence. The method varies, the principle does not. And when fear loses ground, something powerful happens. Faith ceases to be mere discourse and becomes a state of mind. Mark 9:23. Faith as a creative state of mind there is. At one point, faith completely changes how we understand it. Faith is not a fleeting emotion. It's an inner stance. When Jesus says, everything is possible for one who believes, it's not empty optimism, but a mind aligned, without a plan B. True belief reorganizes the body, focus, and actions, and this creates movement where it previously seemed blocked. That's why people with conviction see doors where others only see walls. The mind believes first, reality responds later, always in that order. A simple example: two people with the same talent, the same opportunity, and the same starting point. The difference between those who move forward and those who get stuck is almost never ability. It's conviction. Those who believe act as if the outcome is possible. Those who doubt act by asking permission from their own insecurity. Faith makes a person behave differently even before any external proof appears, and repeated behavior becomes destiny. No shortcuts. Faith isn't about sitting around waiting. It's about acting in accordance with what you believe. A believing mind gives thanks before seeing, prepares before arriving, and moves before feeling secure. A practical example: studying before a promotion, organizing finances before a raise, taking care of your health before a diagnosis. This isn't anxiety. It's internal alignment with the desired future. And when faith becomes a mental habit, the need to protect that territory arises, because undisciplined thinking becomes silent sabotage. 2 Corinthians 10:5. Master your mind before it masters you. There is at a crucial point that separates those who grow from those who live in cycles. A thought isn't true simply because it appears. When Paul speaks of taking every thought captive, he's teaching inner governance, not emotional repression. Most people believe everything they think, and then become hostages to ideas that should never have stayed. Thoughts are like visitors. Some you welcome, others you thank and send away. And spiritual maturity begins when a person learns to do this sorting without guilt. The enemy doesn't need to destroy someone's life. It's enough to confuse their mind. A thought of doubt enters small, but if no one questions it, it becomes a conviction. Therefore, mastering the mind is not fighting against thoughts, but confronting them with something greater. When the "it won't work" arises, the trained mind responds with truth, not emotion. This silent internal dialogue defines who leads, you or fear. A practical exercise that is simple and powerful: naming the thought. When a person says, "This is fear, it's not me," or "This is doubt, it's not true," they break the automatic spell. After that, they replace it, never leaving it empty, with a truth that strengthens faith, focus, and purpose. It's like replacing an annoying song with one that elevates the atmosphere. And when this habit becomes routine, something happens naturally. The mind begins to operate at a higher, clearer, and more stable level. 1 Corinthians 2:16. Accessing the mind of Christ in daily life there is on a level that almost no one truly explores. The idea that the mind of Christ is not a distant promise, but an readily available access. When Paul says, "We have the mind of Christ," he is not talking about perfection, but about internal reference. It's about learning to think clearly amidst chaos, purposefully amidst pressure, and lovingly amidst conflict. The mind of Christ doesn't react impulsively. It responds with direction, and that completely changes the outcome of decisions. Those who access this pattern stop living in survival mode and begin living in conscious mode. This mind functions as a silent filter. Not every stimulus becomes an emotion, nor does every emotion become an action. The person begins to observe before reacting, to listen before responding, and to choose before taking a position. In practice, this avoids hasty decisions, words that generate regret, and attitudes that sabotage relationships. It is emotional maturity with spiritual roots, simple to understand, but profound to live. A very real example: someone with the mind of Christ doesn't enter into arguments to win, but to preserve peace. They don't make important decisions in the heat of anger, nor promises in the heat of excitement. They learn to pause, breathe, and ask themselves, does this come from truth or from reaction? This small pause changes everything because it creates space between stimulus and choice. And it is in this space that wisdom appears, quietly but powerfully. The more a person nourishes this mind, the more natural it becomes. Mindful reading, intentional silence, unhurried prayer, and attention to one's own thoughts refine this access. It's not mysticism, it's daily practice, like learning a new inner language. And when the mind begins to operate at this level, It naturally seeks something essential. Take care of what occupies your thoughts every day. Philippians 4:8. What occupies the mind commands the life. There is a simple, almost obvious principle, and precisely for that reason, ignored by many people. Paul isn't giving sweet advice. He's delivering a mental lion. What occupies the mind defines the course of life. The mind functions like a radio station. It doesn't create the signal, but chooses the frequency. And the chosen frequency decides the internal climate. Fear or faith, scarcity or abundance, heaviness or lightness. At the end of the day, life responds to what was repeated, not to what was desired. Focus is a silent form of prayer. When someone continually thinks about what is good, just and true, they are training their brain to recognize opportunities. Those who nurture complaints, comparisons, and negativity end up seeing the world as a field of constant threat. It's not divine punishment, it's mental consistency. The mind learns to seek what you teach it to value. A practical example is intentional gratitude. Not automatic gratitude, but the kind you choose, especially on difficult days. Writing down 3 good things before bed, giving thanks for something simple, or acknowledging a small step forward changes your internal state. And when your internal state changes, decisions become clearer and your body responds better. Gratitude doesn't ignore problems. It prevents them from dominating your mind. No one changes their life by trying to control everything externally. The real turning point happens when a person takes responsibility for their daily thoughts. Choosing good thoughts means choosing good paths, even without realizing it at the time. It's planting now to harvest later. It always works like that. And that opens the door to something inevitable. When the mind changes its pattern, destiny begins to silently reorganize itself. There is something that almost no one wants to admit. Information doesn't change lives. Application changes. It's pointless to understand how the mind works if tomorrow the person wakes up and lets the same thoughts take control. The question isn't, did you believe this content? It's, what are you going to do differently from today onwards? Because an untrained mind reverts to autopilot, and autopilot almost always leads to the same place. Real change begins when someone decides to govern their own thoughts, even on difficult days. What thoughts have you been silently repeating? Are they thoughts of faith or fear, of expansion or scarcity, of purpose or survival? Because ultimately, your life always follows the voice you listen to most within. If you nurture focus, clarity grows. If you nurture faith, courage grows. If you nurture doubt, paralysis grows. And this choice happens every day, in small, invisible decisions. Invite you to take practical action today. Choose a verse, a principle, a truth, and return to it throughout the week. Observe automatic thoughts. Question what weakens you and reinforce what builds you up. Don't wait to feel like it, but decide consciously. Because a disciplined mind creates a disciplined life, and that changes destiny. If this content has inspired you, don't let it die here. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and continue learning how to align faith, mind, and action. Write in the comments which thought you choose to plant from today onwards. This generates commitment. And remember, whoever changes their mind, changes their path. And whoever changes their path, changes their story. The decision begins now, within you.